This is Jerry Barrett talking. Today's date is April 29th, 1986. I'm interviewing John Bradley in his office in Washington, D.C. at the ALPA headquarters. John, if you would, could you just talk a little bit about what you did by way of experience to get to where you are today?
Yeah, I'm the Assistant Director of Representation for the Airline Pilots Association. Been with ALPA for 19 years. Started with ALPA in Chicago while we were headquartered in Chicago. Worked as a negotiator, contract negotiator, for about 5 or 6 years, and I was an assistant to a director that came on board in Washington, and I've taken part in all aspects of labor relations since I started, from the negotiations, direct negotiations, mediation, to strikes, to system boards, grievance hearings, mergers, any aspect of labor relations within the Airline Pilots Association.
You mentioned before we went on the record that you had been involved in the almost 20 years you've been with the airline pilots, that any strike involving the pilots or near strike you have been involved in.
Yes.
At all airlines.
Oh yeah, at all the carriers. Yeah. And in the early years, we also represented the flight attendants through the S&S division.
Oh, yeah.
And so any strike that affected the pilots, whether it were flight attendant or pilots, if we represented them, I was involved in.
Oh yeah. Okay. So that's
either directly or indirectly.
That's an extensive set of experience.
Well, throughout, because we represent, I guess now it's probably about 48 or 49 carriers. In those days, we were, from the early years, I guess we'd always represented about 27 to 30, 32 carriers. And they're all individually, collectively bargained. Mm-hmm. So we have fires all the time.
It's a part of the routine, right?
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you were involved in the Eastern negotiations off and on over the years. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah. Where I got involved in the Eastern negotiations really was after they applied for mediation, which was very fast after they started their direct negotiations. Mm-hmm. They met, I believe, my days may be a little bit wrong on this, but I think they met 1 or 2 days in direct negotiations. And then the company filed for mediation, mm-hmm. which is unheard of under the provisions of the Railway Labor Act and under our normal course of negotiations. So everyone knew that the company had a plan, that the company had a reason for doing that. And of course the pilots were very, very upset, understandably so, because they saw it another pressure tactic that was coming down. Maybe not a tactic, but another pressure coming to the pilot group, which they viewed at that point as either maybe a real problem or maybe not a real problem. So I guess what I'm really getting into right away on this thing is a credibility problem.
Okay.
The mediation board aspect of it is a subject that we can go into whenever you would like me to.
Okay.
But what really happened was they applied for mediation immediately after 1 day of meetings, said that the company, that is, saying that they have reached an impasse and wanted to get right into the mediation sessions. Now that, if you're experienced in labor relations under the Railway Labor Act, that just means one thing. They want to get in through mediation, then get down through the 30-day cooling off period and either have a strike or a settlement. Okay. Now that, depending on how you look at it, that's pressure.
Yes.
If you want to go have a fight, that's the best way in the world to have a fight. And we were then geared up to have a fight. Mm-hmm. And I think the problem with that is the credibility by the company taking those steps to the pilot group, not only the leadership of the pilots, but also to the line pilots, just meant once again the company's trying to get us. For the last 10 years, the pilots, all the employees, but I'll speak primarily the pilots, all of the employees, but the pilots in particular, for the past 10 years have been giving them concessionary agreements. I'm not sure if the number is true, but I've been told that it was over $1 billion over 10 years in concessions. that's probably very close if it's not accurate. Now, so you set the stage over 10 years of bargaining on that property, and Colonel Borman, when he came on, was the greatest, just the greatest thing in the world that happened to Eastern Airlines and to the Eastern employees, all the employees. I think probably Colonel Borman, you know, because of the atmosphere of the deregulation and the problems that Eastern Airlines has had and everything else, you know, I think he did his level best to do whatever he could to try to keep it above water and try to make it survive. And as those 10 years progressed, I think it just got worse and worse. And in his efforts to try to do what was probably necessary to do, he kept going, I'll put it in the term that he kept going back to the well for another drink. And in the jargon of labor relations, or things that, you know, in these terms, you can go to the well so many times. And you look at them and you say, well, look, are you going to fix it? Which is a term that came very prevalent through these negotiations. But are you going to fix it, or are we just going to continue to give up our salary or our working conditions? And the thing is going to go down the tube sooner or later anyhow. So I'm giving you a picture immediately, I mean, without too much background into this thing, with what I think Colonel Borman did over a period of years that was tremendous with Eastern Airlines and tried to do, but got into I don't want to say a rut, he got into because of all kinds, whatever the reasons were, whether there were fuel problems, equipment problems, whether it was deregulation, whether it was the industry itself. For whatever reasons, he was always going back to the employees, always dipping back into that well, and the employees turning around saying, okay, there's the VEP program, there's an 18% pay cut, it's 24% pay cut, my working conditions are falling apart, this is not the job that it used to be. And people will turn around and say, well, even though it's not the job that it used to be, I'd like to see some daylight out there where it may not be the same as it was, but it might be better than it is today, or last year, or the year before. So the psychology to the employee, and in particular to the pilot, is, okay, look, I don't mind giving these concessions, I don't mind, I'll do anything. You know, I will go forward. I want this company to survive. And up to a couple of years ago, everybody wanted Frank Borman to survive. And when I say Frank Borman, I'm talking about senior management of the company. And I don't want to single Frank Borman out. However, he was singled out quite a bit through this. So anyhow, the atmosphere came down now that it's another going to the well. It's another threat. Last year, if you recall, and the year before, there were the bankruptcy threats, the Chapter 11, there was the banks are going to call in the loans, we're going to be in technical default. This was all major, these were major problems to the pilots until they went through them. They were in technical default a year ago or 2 years ago. Nothing happened. They were threatened with bankruptcy. It never happened. They were threatened with the banks, the federal agencies, the National Mediation Board, all these black clouds that are hovering over this whole employee group. And they were, so where this ends up is that there's no credibility. Senior management can turn around and say, we've got to have a 18 or a 20% pay cut. We got to take this or we're just going down the tubes. Well, you know, they said it the year before that, the year before that. And it may be true, but it's the way that it's done and the way that it's handled is, if I can use the term a mistake, that may have been a mistake. When they got into the negotiations, and I will tell you that I don't know if we're going to have the time to do this, there are a lot of things on the pilot side that were not done properly. All right? But I think at this point, for what we're doing, I'm going to go into my view of the company at this particular time.
That's fine.
If that's okay with you.
That's fine.
And so, you know, the stage is set now. There's no credibility. There has not been any credibility for years. Senior management is considered the worst management in the industry by the employees of Eastern Airlines. Rightly or wrongly, I'm not justifying or saying that it's right or wrong. I'm giving you the feeling that was there, the atmosphere that we're working under. Because I don't believe that to be true, personally. But that's the feeling that they had. Now, if you went over to TWA or to Pan American or several other carriers out there, those pilots and employees might say, we've got the worst senior management there is. Pan American has been going broke for the last 5 years, losing $365 million 1 year, $1 million a day. They're still there. So again, the credibility problem that was at Eastern is also at other areas, other airlines. It's a very, very complex. The industry that we're in right now is just upside down, topsy-turvy, and very, very difficult. And it has been since deregulation. So now we get into negotiations at Eastern, who has now for the past 5 years, as I've just mentioned, has been nothing but concessionary negotiations, veiled threats, some not so veiled. Pilots looking at this as their career. They're married to that company. They're not going somewhere else. Through the seniority system, they can't jump from Eastern to Pan American or to United or to People Express. They go right down to the bottom of the seniority list and start all over. So their entire careers are on the line, which, unless you're somewhat familiar with this, it doesn't, it's easy to turn around and say a mechanic might go somewhere else, but he will. He can. And perform his job. A pilot, and pretty much within the same equity that he was making it somewhere else, pilot cannot do that. And I think flight attendants cannot do that. But definitely pilots cannot do that. So here you are. You've now got a scenario where you're starting direct negotiations. You've got a history of concessionary bargaining, a history of no credibility with the senior management as well as middle management that you deal with. You have a employee group, a pilot group, who's angry, who's disappointed, who feels that they've been used over and over and over. They see the company coming to the well again, and then they sit down at the bargaining table in one day, and the company says, we have reached an impasse, let's apply for mediation. That immediately gives the employees the indication that this is bad faith bargaining. It immediately gives them the indication that they are not going to negotiate. It's a take it or leave it proposal, which it was, and it's the way that it was brought out. So immediately they turn around and say, okay, we're going to have a war, we're going to have a problem, let's gear up for it. And we did. We did meet the mediation board. Several of us went over and met with the National Mediation Board chairman and some other people over at the board and told them that how unfair unfair is a great word in labor relations, but how unjust it was to have 1 day of direct negotiations and then have a mediator there, because we know the scenario, we know the plan, because all they want to do is get through mediation, probably in a week or two, and go down to a strike and take us on, because they did not feel that the pilot group would strike. And at that point, they were probably correct. So now we start an educational process going through to our own people. I believe that the company misread the pilot group terribly. I think that by their actions, they gave us the ammunition to go to our pilot group, to the leadership, to the Master Executive Council, and turn around and say, this is what's happened. Those pilots just went crazy. They turned around and said, okay, this is it. They're drawing a line. They're not going to negotiate. They're not going to bargain with us in good faith, are terms I'm using, but to a line pilot, they're not even going to sit down at the table and try to work out problems, as we have always done for 10 years. This is the first time that Eastern Airlines says we've ever had a mediator on that property. Never happened before.
That's very significant, isn't it?
Very significant.
Very significant.
They have never, their manner of negotiations was to work it out in direct negotiations. If you have a problem, They'd call us in, we went in and solved the problem, mutually, between both sides. If we had a problem, our master chairman could pick up the telephone and call Frank Borman, or call Bill Ussery, or call whoever it was to call, and they'd sit down and we'd work out the problems. That changed, and that changed drastically. So immediately we know that this is not going to be a standard series of negotiations. We know that Eastern is losing money. We know that Eastern banks are having problems. They could be in technical default. We know that there's a problem, could be the possibility of bankruptcy, because there has been for the last 3 or 4 years. And we know there's all kinds of bad, dire things out there that have got to be solved. And once again, we're willing to go in there, and we wanted to sit down and solve them. So, I'm not saying who threw the first stone, but when we got the attitude and the atmosphere of in the collective bargaining arena now, that we meet one day, we want a mediator, and we know where it's going, then we have no alternative than to turn around and get our people geared up for a possible strike. Now, the hope is always that you're never going to have a strike, but we had to get them ready for it. Now, we've got into this very technical aspect of strike preparation with the Airline Pilots Association, that is very sophisticated. We've started with the tapes, the videotapes, the teleconferencing all over the country, and it's tremendous. And there are good aspects about it as well as bad aspects. But we went forward with it.
This would have been about in January now of '86.
Yes, this is, we started, I got involved in it in December. The company applied for mediation in early December, I think, and because it was right before Christmas. And we convinced the National Mediation Board to not put a mediator into it and let us meet in direct negotiations to see if we could get through this. They met for like a week or two before Christmas and maybe a week or so after Christmas.
Okay.
With one break, which was probably Christmas Day, in direct negotiations. Then as soon as a mediator was put down on the property, then I got involved into it, personally involved in it, and physically involved in the meetings. Then it went through the normal, what I would say, the normal mediatory process, except I knew they were trying to speed it up, and they wanted to get down to the bottom end of it. There was either going to be a strike or there isn't going to be a strike. And there were a lot of fires all around the place. There was there were the possibilities of a buyout by somebody. There was the possibility of a bankruptcy. There was the technical default from the banks. There was not only the bankruptcy of Chapter 11, there was the possibility of Chapter 7 liquidation. So the thing reeked with nothing but problems. And the emotions from both the company and the pilots, the leadership, as well as from the pilot side, the line pilots, the effect was devastating. These people, every Christmas rolls around at Eastern Airlines, they don't know if they're going to have a job or not. They don't know if they're going to take a new pay cut. When I say devastating, I'm being charitable. The emotional strain is devastating. Now, at the same time, the flight attendants are in negotiations, in mediation, and at that time, I think we're released. Proffered arbitration from the National Mediation Board, going down a 30-day going-off period, and the company, absolutely, everybody knew, if they didn't reach an agreement, they were going to take a strike if the flight attendant struck, and they were going to impose working conditions. Whether or not they would have continued to try to fly or not, I don't have any idea. But so the scenario was such, and the IAM were having problems with Eastern for many years. So there was no good labor relations going on at Eastern. So the scenario is set now to go forward in mediation at this point under the most adverse and difficult times that you could really imagine. And it truly was. The emotional strain for everybody was very, very intense. And middle management within the company, I'm sure, definitely, and senior management at that company. But if you went to buy a ticket at a gate a ticket counter, the stress and the pain that those people have, they didn't, when I'd go up there personally, they didn't know I was with ALPA or anything of that nature, but I could just see the stress that was there and what's going to happen. Oh, it happens all the time. I don't know. If it goes down, it goes down. Just horrible attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
So a very, very difficult workplace.
Mm-hmm.
We'll put it in that. Now you're trying to bargain and negotiate a collective bargaining agreement under these circumstances, and you've got a lot of problems. The first thing that happens under normal negotiations is you have to have credibility with the people that you're dealing with at the bargaining table. If you don't have at least some respect, you may not like them, but you've got to have some respect for them. It's a very small industry, and if you don't have the respect, or at least have something honorable across the table on either side now, you'll never get there.
Yeah.
And when you have the combination of all the things that I've just said to you, I mean, you can see the difficulty you're going to have in reaching an agreement. Now, Colonel Borman, I'm skipping some pieces through here, but we can fill them in later if you'd like or whatever.
Okay.
I have found, from my personal view in this thing, the negotiations went absolutely nowhere until Bill Essery and Frank Borman personally got involved in the negotiations. Now again, we had no direct negotiations just across the table. There was always a mediator present when I was involved in it. And when Colonel Borman and Bill Essery became involved, things happened. Now, my impression at that time was that people just couldn't stand Colonel Borman, from what I had heard. But I can assure you that when Colonel Borman came to that bargaining table and we had meetings, he was respected. He was, by some people, almost more than respected. I mean, he was thought of as a tremendous, tremendous man. And he had respect, and he had honor. Now, there were other people at that bargaining table who did not see it that way, who just felt another one, we're going down the tubes, and more baloney. But I can assure you, and I was very surprised because I'd heard a lot of negative things, but when Borman and Bill Essery met with the pilots, there was a real respect. Whether or not Colonel Borman or Bill Essery would acknowledge that at the moment and realize that it was there, that would be an interesting question. I saw it, but I was far enough away where I could see it because I wasn't dealing with them all the time up until that point. And it was truly there. And as a negotiator, the only time we got close to reaching an agreement was when Bill Essery and Frank Borman were at that bargaining table. And I'm going through this, or maybe I'm jumping too quickly into this. I could go through daily sequences, but I don't know if we want to do that yet. But at the end, on the Board of Directors meeting, the night that we reached an agreement, and the night or early morning when the company was sold to Texas Air Corporation, I personally believe, so we had an afternoon session, I would say at 5 o'clock or so, where Bill Essery and Frank Borman came to the bargaining table. In that 1 hour, we accomplished more. There were two different days when I felt that we could have possibly reached an agreement. One was in an all-night session here in Washington, D.C., in the offices right down here, where we met almost all night, and it broke off. And I think it should not have broken off. But everybody was tired. We were up 24 hours, whatever it was. Super Bowl Sunday, I think it was. But everybody was beat. Everybody was tired. But I could see an agreement. Could smell an agreement.
Yes.
And I knew that maybe we should take a break, but not break it off. But it did. It fell apart. And that night we got the proffer of arbitration from the mediation board. And we got into that 30-day cooling off period. Now back, the last session in Miami, and that's when I'm talking about in Washington, D.C., Bill Usry and Frank Borman were both in attendance, and we were getting somewhere.
Uh-huh.
Now I'm moving us back into Miami. The last day the board of directors are meeting. I'm not at all privy with what's going on there, except that I know there are meetings taking place. Bill Usry and Frank Borman came over to our hotel, to our conference room, and we met at about 5 in the afternoon. Borman was very upfront, very, very honest. He said what he needed. He told us what he needed. And in a sense, perhaps we were not ready to do it at that moment. I won't go into philosophically why it didn't happen at that point. I think it could have, but Frank Borman and Bill had to go to that board of directors meeting by at like 6 o'clock. So we had 1 hour of their time at that table. And we did more in that 1 hour than we've ever done through any of the other meetings. And I thought we were going to get, I knew we could have gotten there if we'd have had another hour of their time. I'm absolutely positive of that. I fully believe that. They left, and as soon as they, meaning Usry and Frank Borman, left, it just went back to zero, ground zero. And that's why I think at the beginning of the conversation I was commenting that you may hear or you may have heard that a lot of people were totally against Frank Borman, totally against Bill Usry. A lot of name calling, a lot of mudslinging, a lot of bad things, a lot of bad blood for whatever reasons over this period of years. But, and I hope I'm not the only person that'll tell you this, but I sensed and felt a very deep respect for Frank Borman and for Bill Usry. Not only from me personally, which was there, but from the pilots. I really mean it. And you may hear other people say other things, but at those particular times, there was a very strong respect for them. So anyhow, it broke off, they left, and the meetings really just, in my opinion, just fell back into the neverland of not reaching an agreement. A real lack of negotiations, a real lack of trying to get there.
There must have been a lot of uncertainty, though, that night, because there was the likelihood of the sale, the possibility of...
Well, quite frankly, what happened then to that point? Now, I very quickly I gave you kind of a sketch of what really happened and how we got to where, from mediation to here, to there. From the pilots' view, the pilots were very indecisive. The pilots, as a negotiating committee, again, the reason, there are a number of reasons for all these things. Maybe the different negotiating people and negotiators bargain differently. I would negotiate a contract differently than you would, and other people would do it differently. And because of the lack of credibility that the pilot group had with the company, and I don't know if you're aware of the structure of ALPA. We have a negotiating committee, and we have what's called a Master Executive Council. Okay? Now that negotiating committee is responsible to the MEC, Master Executive Council. And I will tell you that MEC, the Master Executive Council, at this particular point in time, was a very angry group of men. And they're a very political group of men. And they had been hearing that somebody's going to buy the airline. We need these concessions, technical default. All of these emotional things are coming down on this group, who at this point is now geared up to take a strike. And they are really geared up to take a strike. We've had the teleconferencing going on. We had the lines of communications that were, it was tremendous. We could have shut that company down on a dime. The night of that strike, if we had called a strike, nothing would have moved. Absolutely nothing. The United strike, in my opinion, was very well done. I mean, it was put down and shut down. This would have been cleaner and better than the United Strike. There would not have been one wheel turn. Not only would the pilots have 100% support, the flight attendants because they were having their own problems, the IAM because they were having their problems, an awful lot of non-union people, management people, have also had enough. Except for what was really happening at Eastern Airlines, for the financial status of Eastern Airlines, that, in a textbook sense, would have been ideal for a strike. There should have been a strike at Eastern Airlines. If we were in a different setting, a different financial mode for Eastern Airlines, not, I don't want to blame everything on deregulation, but if we were in a classic labor relations conflict, there should have been a strike at Eastern, in the sense of a bloodletting. The hostility, the anger, there would have been a catharsis.
Okay.
So the pilots could turn around and say, God damn it, we shut them down. And the company could turn around and say, screw them, we took the strike. You know, and then settle it in 5 days or 6 days or 7 days or whatever.
Yes.
But everybody was so angry at each other. And everybody had the anxiety of wanting to hit somebody. And it was true. And it was, I mean, it really, emotionally, it was terrible. And people got mad at our Master Executive Council chairman. Our Master Executive Council chairman got mad at the company. I mean, they were at each other's throats. The pilots were at the company's throats. They wanted to get each other.
Yeah.
So, you know, under normal circumstances, take a strike. Jesus, get rid of you know, when I say a bloodletting, and I truly mean a catharsis. I really do. Let it go. Under a normal setting, there'd be, let them do their thing, throw racks at each other, you know, swear, scream, do anything. But under these circumstances, if there would have been a strike, Eastern would have gone under. I mean, there would not be an Eastern Airlines today. There's no question about it. So that also added to the frustration and to the emotional aspect of the whole thing. I mean, it's really an interesting thing that happened. However, I can absolutely assure you that if it would have gone down to a strike, it would have been the cleanest strike I would have ever seen. I mean, they were so geared up, you know, that I know it would have cost the company everything, but it would have, as I say, under normal circumstances, the catharsis that would have come out of that would have been right for Eastern Airlines. Then they could, 2 weeks after that, once it's settled, then it would have gotten settled. Then they could all get back and say, well, all right, goddamn it, we did what we had to do. I feel better. Maybe it's a little bit like having an argument with your wife or your best friend or something of that nature for a moment. You vent it, you say it, then you say, oh, geez, okay, it's all over. Let's get on with our life. And that's kind of how I wish Eastern could have come down. I really do.
I take it that as a result of their not having done that, there's, after the settlement, there's some residue remaining.
A lot of residue. See, I really believe, in my mind, the worst thing that could have happened at Eastern happened. I really believe a bankruptcy would have been better than the takeover.
Oh,
The
really?
Chapter 11 bankruptcy. A reorganization. I really do.
Huh?
I really, you know, I think anything other than what happened would have been better. I don't believe Frank Lorenzo's taking over Eastern Airlines is that not going to be good for the pilots of Eastern Airlines. I don't believe that that's going to be good for our industry in general. And I know it's not going to be good for all the employees of Eastern. I just feel that. I may be wrong. You know, I've been wrong before. But I just do not believe that that's the right answer. I think the employees, Frank Borman, Bill Ussery, the leaders, the real leaders of that airline, could have settled their differences if they'd have taken a different approach, if they'd have handled it differently. And I believe, which we can go into another time if you like, because I have very maybe profound feelings on that. I really do. It could have been done differently and should have been done differently. I also think that I think if they would have gone into bankruptcy, which sounds terrible, especially for me to say that, I expect. I think if they'd have gone into reorganization under Chapter 11, the spirit of that airline, of the employees, would have rallied, believe it or not, again around Frank Borman. I think they would have tried to find, okay, God damn it, we finally did it. Another catharsis. God damn it, Frank, file bankruptcy if that's what's necessary to do, but let's get it back working so we can go through a Christmas and buy our kids presents and not worry about that telephone ringing Christmas Day saying I don't have a job. Let's be done with the fears and everything that's coming down on us. If filing bankruptcy is the answer, then let's do it. Let's regroup. Let's take our cuts and pay. Let's do what we're going to have to do under our working conditions and make it successful. Build it up again. I think that they would have done that.
How do you account for Borman's ability to attract that kind of allegiance? Is it mostly related to the pilots, you think, and the commonality that other pilots have for each other?
I think there's a lot of that. I think that the allegiance, yes, I very definitely. I believe there is. I think Frank understands Colonel Borman understands pilots. I think he has a very, very deep respect for pilots. And I'm not saying that he doesn't for their employees. I just think he has a real love for aviation, for flying himself, and respect for pilots. I think more so than other employees, but I also believe that when you meet, and I don't know Colonel Borman that well, I don't know Frank Borman that well, but I know if I saw him tomorrow on the street, I could go up to him and say hello to him, and he would stop and we'd have a conversation. He's he's got a lot of charisma, he's a gentleman, he's fun, he's pleasant to be, in my experience, he's pleasant to be around, and he's sharp as a tack. I think he's brilliant. Now, I think that he's made some mistakes, though everybody makes mistakes. But I think he's also one who learns by mistakes when he makes them. I truly believe they read this one entirely wrong. I don't know, if there were collective decision-making, if, advisors that were assisting them, outside counsel, inside counsel, whatever. I think they made horrible mistakes through this and did not have to do this. That's truly another separate session, if you'd like, but it could have been in a totally different way. And knowing now the players, the Bill Usseries, the Frank Bormans, and some of the other people, now I'm more convinced now than ever that it could have been accomplished in a different way. Without a doubt. I have absolutely no doubt. The frustrations, so I didn't get into too much of some of the credibility of our pilots, the decision-making roles that we had to make, and it was not good. We could not sit at the bargaining table, or we did not sit at that bargaining table and make decisions. We did not turn around and say, we can do this, we can do that, we can do this, we can do that. Again, part of it because of the atmosphere of what was going on anyhow, the fear, or not the fear, the paranoia, if you will, of whether or not this company is really going to go into bankruptcy, if they're really going to, if they really could go into bankruptcy, if the technical defaulting was real, if the takeover was real. There were pilots in leadership roles who believed they were did not have financial problems. They felt that it was a scam.
Oh, really?
And believed it.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that may be hard for you and I to believe at this moment. From all you have to do, read the Wall Street Journal or read the publications to watch what's going on, the losses and everything else. But I'm going to use the term paranoia a little bit. People were afraid of a lot of things, but on the other hand, there were people that meant this, that they wanted a 15 or 20% pay increase.
They really thought the money was there,
and they really felt the money was there. They felt that it was a scam. They felt that they were company was getting in their pockets so often that now they felt that the pilots would just roll over and they could do whatever they wanted. And they did not believe what was really happening. Now, it may be, there's an interesting thing, 'cause I had a little session with someone when I got back on this myself. I think there's a human factor in this, that we turn around and say, your company is going bankrupt, and you just won't accept the fact. I had someone, up till 2 weeks ago, I smoked. I had someone come up to me and say, John, smoking will give you cancer. Why don't you quit smoking? But I didn't, and I hadn't.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you know, I'm saying, how in the world can someone credible or someone real not believe that that company's in the financial posture that we know it's in?
Yes.
Until someone said, John, you know, smoking is going to give you cancer. But maybe there's a mental block that you won't accept certain things. I mean, there is an interesting
Yes.
human factor, psychological factor, whatever the proper term is, that with the combination of all these other things that were happening over the past 10 years, and again, the animosities, the anger, the frustrations, all these emotions that wouldn't allow people to address those problems.
Just denial.
Just denial.
Yeah,
Absolutely
yeah, denial.
Denial and more than denial. They're lying to us. This is a scam.
Okay.
They don't believe it. And don't you believe it. God damn it, go in there and get me a pay increase. Incredible. So now you have a structure on the MEC, our pilot MEC, as well as negotiating committee, who do not believe what's going on, or a portion of them that do not believe what's really taking place. So how do you make decisions, which you have to do in negotiations and collective bargaining?
Certainly weren't, within the pilots organization then, they weren't able to make counter proposals, but they probably weren't even able to evaluate proposals made to them.
Oh, absolutely.
If they couldn't get themselves together enough to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think we could have if we had time. See, the company pushed this thing right into mediation.
Yes.
And from the mediation process right into a 30-day cooling off period. And you've got to, you can't forget that once you do that as a union, we've got to protect ourselves. So if we know that we're being forced down into A, a strike, B, a bankruptcy, C, a takeover, now it's our responsibility as a labor union to our membership to tag all those bases and get ready for all of it.
That's what they pay dues for.
That's what they pay dues for.
Yes.
So we get the best attorneys money can buy, and we get the best experienced people that money can buy, and we get all the advice, and we get everything in the world going for us. We get all of our technical people. We've got these teleconferences now geared up. We've got strike headquarters. We've got strike coordinators. We've got everything set up for this thing. Now you're into a whirlpool. You're into something that you're gearing people up so quickly that if you don't do something, if you don't strike, they're disappointed. Or they're, no matter what you do now, I mean, there is such a thing as gearing people up, getting them hyped up so much, which in this case was not at all difficult. I mean, this was a matter of, look fellas, it's hitting us, it's coming again. You know, these people would have, I'm telling you, if there was a strike, it would have shut it down. Just absolutely the cleanest thing you've ever seen.
Some of the process you put into motion almost takes on a life of its own.
Absolutely it does. It's throwing gasoline on the fire. And all of a sudden, now it's organized and it is structured. And we have got the greatest thing in this living thing is all organized and structured, and 30 days from today or 26 days from today or 4 days from today, this airline's going to stop operating. And we are going to do it. And everybody is going to support us.
Yes.
I mean, it's really something. And it's real. So then we get down to this process, and you know, you get a lot of hairy-chested people, and you get a lot of muscles, and you get all this business, and people that have not necessarily been through some of these things don't realize that it's awful hard to get back to work once you get out side. All right? And there are a lot of things that, you know, the quote professionals think about that a lot of other people don't always think about.
Yeah. Starting a strike is easier than settling.
Oh, it sure is.
Yeah.
It sure is.
Yep.
Because the emotion, because
Right.
of everything. And in this case, it was very easy. It truly was very, very easy. But I guess part of what I'm saying then too is that it really did not have to happen. I think Eastern, I've got to blame, I hate to blame, all right? But I think I would say that Eastern management misread an awful lot through this series of negotiations. They misread it. They did not have to do it. They could have gotten their problems resolved without having a TAC take over, without having a bankruptcy, without having all those dire things. There was a way to do it.
I want to stop you there because I've been watching the clock and you're not, and you have to go.
I'm sorry.
Can I get a commitment to you to continue?
Yeah, anytime at all. I'll tell you, I'm more than happy to. And there's a lot of things that should be said in this. And I hope that, and I really mean this, I hope that they'll be said and that the proper people will read and listen. And I hope we get to see what the company felt, because it'll help. I don't know if it'll help in Eastern anymore, because I don't know if Colonel Borman's going to stay there or senior management is going to stay there. But we learned from, you know, the Continental strike, the United strike, the Wien strike.
Yep.
After the Wien strike, we had something which may be an interesting thing to you, what I called charm school. It was a 2-year strike, and very bad. I mean, a very heady strike. And at the end of it, we were trying to find a way, okay, now look, if we ever get this damn thing resolved, which we did it was tagged onto the Deregulation Act for a Presidential Emergency Board. So we knew that it was going to be resolved. And then we say, okay, you get it done. Now how do you get our pilots talking to that company? I mean, how do you bury the hatchet? How do you really say, you know, you did it, so, I mean, you're accountable for your actions, and you struck, and the company did this, and they took the strike. They brought in scabs, they brought in replacement people. I mean, how do you get back here now and live together?
Yeah.
So we found a way. And that may be another thing on here, but it's called, I called it a charm school.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.